I sat at the edge of the breakfast table, my coffee untouched, watching my family chat and laugh as if I were invisible. Being the youngest had always carried its own weight, a quiet expectation to accommodate, to step back, to be seen, but never fully acknowledged. My parents' smiles were polite, my siblings' greetings warm but distant, and the subtle favoritism toward them had carved itself into the rhythm of our lives. I remembered countless moments of overlooked effort, setting the table just so, organizing gifts for birthdays, making sure everyone else's needs were met while my own were quietly pushed aside. Even the folded leaf-shaped napkin from last Thanksgiving still sat in the drawer, a tiny reminder of gestures unnoticed, of contributions absorbed into the background. I picked up my phone to scroll through emails, a mundane attempt to distract myself from the simmering frustration, when a notification drew my attention, a ping from our family group chat. Curiosity outweighed caution. I opened it, expecting routine chatter about wedding preparations. Instead, my stomach sank as the screen filled with messages plotting to humiliate me at my own celebration. Jokes, sarcastic quips, intentional mockery, meticulously crafted humiliation. Not an accident, not a slip. This was deliberate, orchestrated with precision. The disbelief hit first, followed closely by a sting of betrayal. My family had always been complicated, but this was a line crossed. My fingers trembled over the screen as I read through the cruel plans, each message a confirmation of what I had suspected all along. I was the overlooked, the expendable, the one to be laughed at when no one was watching. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the shock settle. Years of quiet endurance and loyalty flashed before me, moments where I had put myself aside to avoid conflict, to maintain harmony. And yet, every sacrifice had been reduced to a punchline. My heart ached with a familiar sorrow, but beneath it, a spark of something sharper began to kindle. Anger, yes, but calculated, controlled. I traced the edge of the napkin in my pocket, a small emblem of unseen efforts, and let its symbolism anchor me. The hurt was real, but it would not define me. Not this time. Scrolling further, I stumbled upon a particularly vicious comment, a cruel jab at my ability, or perceived lack thereof, to organize family events. The pattern became undeniable. My siblings were celebrated, their mistakes excused. I was the scapegoat, the amusement, the target. The weight of recurring injustices pressed down, yet this awareness brought with it clarity. Anger shifted into focus. Betrayal morphed into strategic awareness. Every word, every plotted humiliation became data to be analyzed, an insight into my family's hierarchy and vulnerabilities. I wasn't powerless. I was underestimated, and that underestimation would be my advantage. I set my phone down and let my mind map out the possibilities. There were friends within the extended family who had shown subtle support over the years, moments where small gestures hinted at allegiance. I recalled conversations, events, and the few times someone had quietly vouched for me. Perhaps there was leverage in history, in knowledge of old disputes, in memories carefully tucked away. My approach would have to be measured. Composure was crucial. I could not allow visible anger to betray my intentions. My mind raced through scenarios, contingencies, potential allies, and the ways in which I could reclaim agency, step by step, without tipping my hand. By mid-morning, I had resolved internally. I would maintain the appearance of calm, smile when necessary, nod in agreement, but beneath the surface, a plan was forming. The wedding was a stage, and I would not be the butt of their jokes. My position at the edge of the table no longer felt like a place of exclusion. It felt like the perfect vantage point. From here, I could observe, calculate, and prepare. Every interaction, every glance, every offhand comment became a piece of the puzzle. I would not allow this betrayal to define me. Instead, I would let it sharpen me, readying for the moment when subtle strategy would meet opportunity, when quiet intelligence would counter their arrogance. The day stretched ahead, full of normalcy and veiled tension, and I moved through it with measured steps, each one a quiet assertion that I was no longer the invisible one. I would endure, I would plan, and I would act. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, casting stripes across the living room carpet where I sat with my laptop balanced on my knees. I opened the family group chat once more, eyes scanning each line with meticulous attention. There were patterns I hadn't noticed the first time. A sly joke here, a snide remark there, almost imperceptible hints of malicious delight. I traced the messages back, mentally noting who was actively participating in this scheme to humiliate me. Aunts and cousins I had considered neutral suddenly emerged as silent accomplices. My heart sank slightly, but alongside the sting of betrayal, a deliberate clarity took shape. I remembered the folded leaf-shaped napkin from the previous gathering, tucked into the drawer like an unspoken token of my unnoticed contributions, and it re-emerged in my mind, anchoring me. I would not allow years of quiet endurance to be dismissed so easily. The family gathered in the sunlit kitchen, laughter drifting over the hum of casual conversation. I watched closely as my siblings and cousins interacted, noting the microaggressions and subtle favoritism in real time. My older brother received praise for organizing a small table setting, while my own efforts, silent, unacknowledged, were overlooked. Every smirk, every barely contained glance, hinted at the social hierarchy that had been meticulously orchestrated behind the scenes. I cataloged each interaction, each gesture, mentally mapping the battlefield that the wedding would become. Anticipation mixed with indignation, but I held my expression carefully neutral, a mask of composure, while my mind worked rapidly, assessing angles, opportunities, and potential embarrassments before they even happened. Later, I engaged my sister in a seemingly casual conversation, deliberately dropping a comment about remembering the wedding schedule. Her reaction was telling, a slight twitch, a momentary falter in her smile, before she masked it with practiced nonchalance. I noted it quietly, storing the observation for later. Testing the waters like this gave me a sense of which relatives might be quietly supportive or at least neutral. My internal compass shifted towards subtle strategy. Each word I spoke, each glance I made, could either reveal my awareness or mislead those plotting against me. I held my calm like a shield, knowing every small interaction could yield crucial insight. Then, almost by accident, I stumbled upon a hidden thread. Deleted messages recovered through a notification preview, screenshots saved elsewhere, emails that had escaped initial scrutiny. The breadth of the plan was staggering, and worse, some of the so-called allies I had trusted were implicated. A cold rush of shock coursed through me, but it quickly hardened into determination. This betrayal was wider than I imagined, yet every revelation only sharpened my resolve. I now had the full scope of the humiliation plotted against me, the timing, the intended public embarrassment, and the players involved. The weight of it was heavy, but clarity illuminated the path forward. I began formulating strategies with the precision of someone preparing for a long game. Indirect confrontation, subtle interventions, and the careful gathering of evidence all cycled through my mind. I noted each family member's weaknesses, their predictabilities, and their points of overconfidence. My mental rehearsal included possible conversations, fleeting comments at the rehearsal dinner, and strategic positioning during the ceremony itself. The leaf-shaped napkin returned in my reflections, a symbolic anchor for timing and leverage, something I could employ to turn familiarity into advantage. My focus was sharp. Each movement I made, each smile I offered would be calculated. By late afternoon, my plan had solidified in the quiet of my room. I moved through the remainder of the day with outward calm, engaging family members politely, observing without revealing comprehension. Inside, every thought revolved around the subtle orchestration of my response. I would appear oblivious, serene, but beneath the surface, I was ready. Ready to act, ready to counter, ready to reclaim control over a space where I had always felt peripheral. The room buzzed with the normal rhythms of pre-wedding activity, but I sensed the tension coiling beneath polite conversations, the storm that awaited. And as I stood and stretched, glancing once more at the sun streaming through the blinds, I felt a quiet, steadfast resolve. I would stay composed for now, but the moment I stepped into that room, everything would change. I arrived at the small family gathering in the late afternoon, the Texas sun dipping low and casting a golden glow across the patio. I could feel the subtle energy shift the moment I stepped into the room. Seats had been arranged with invisible hierarchy, cousins clustered in corners, siblings exchanging knowing glances, and I, as usual, perched at the edge, scanning the interactions for any sign of threat or support. Each smile, each casual laugh, carried layers I had learned to read over years of careful observation. My heart beat a measured rhythm, unease tempered by the practiced alertness I had honed over countless overlooked holidays and family dinners. The first sign of microaggressions came swiftly. A comment, light as air, about the flowers I had arranged for the table was met with laughter from a few relatives and polite silence from others. It was clear I was the butt of the joke, though the perpetrators wore their cruelty like casual charm. I met their eyes with quiet composure, allowing a subtle pause before responding. A carefully chosen remark, just enough to plant doubt in their minds, passed unnoticed by most, but surely made an impact. My frustration simmered, but it was under control, a deliberate, measured assertion of presence. I had learned long ago that overt anger only played into their hands. Throughout the gathering, I mentally mapped the room, noting alliances and hidden motives. Aunt Grace, who always smiled a little too broadly at my brother, was now suspect. Cousin Leo's frequent nods and whispered comments signaled silent agreement with those plotting. I noted potential timing for interventions, predicting when a joke or slight might come, preparing subtle counters without ever revealing my awareness. The leaf-shaped napkin from past family events flickered in my memory again, a reminder of unnoticed effort and the small symbols I could use to measure attention or loyalty. Each observation added a piece to a puzzle I was assembling meticulously. As the evening shadows lengthened, I stumbled upon undeniable evidence of deeper collusion. Screenshots of messages and private conversations revealed that secondary family members, those I had trusted, or at least assumed neutral, were complicit in the plan to humiliate me at the wedding. Betrayal ran deeper than I had anticipated, and a cold clarity settled in my chest. The network of humiliation was intricate, calculated, and dangerously close to execution. My resolve hardened, mental gears shifting into strategic mode. I would not be a passive observer anymore. Each interaction, each glance, each word could be a tool or a weapon. Quiet planning consumed the rest of my evening. I considered every possible response: direct confrontation, subtle public undermining, careful gathering of proof. I ran conversations in my mind, rehearsed countermeasures, and visualized how each relative might react when challenged or questioned. The exterior I maintained was calm, polite, almost indifferent, but inside, a disciplined fire was growing. My thoughts circled the family dynamics, past patterns of favoritism, and the predictable responses I could leverage. Every smile I offered, every nod I gave, was part of a carefully orchestrated plan, a quiet assertion of control over chaos I had once endured helplessly. By the time I left the gathering, night had draped itself across the suburban streets, the air carrying a weight that matched my own anticipation. The house receded behind me as I walked toward my car, each step deliberate, measured. The plan was forming, piece by piece, like a chessboard I had spent years studying without their knowledge. The tension was unresolved, thick and heavy, but the direction was clear. The next 48 hours would be decisive. I had observed, mapped, and prepared. The family web had been unraveled in my mind, and I was ready to act with precision when the moment arrived. Every hidden alliance, every subtle slight was now part of a narrative I controlled silently, waiting for the right time to shift from observer to strategist. The family estate felt different that evening. The living room bathed in the warm glow of the lamps, yet heavy with unspoken tensions. As more relatives and close friends trickled in, the subtle undercurrents I had sensed earlier began to intensify. Every handshake, every whispered greeting seemed layered with hidden intentions. I found myself noting seating arrangements and who lingered near whom, my eyes catching glances that were far too calculated to be innocent. Alliances, both overt and concealed, revealed themselves in the smallest gestures: a nod, a shared smirk, a barely audible remark. And I cataloged them all silently, knowing the stakes of the next 48 hours. It wasn't long before the true depth of hidden collusion became apparent. A casual comment, directed ostensibly at a minor household detail, hinted at a broader plan, and I quickly realized it involved family members I had thought neutral. Screenshots I had previously overlooked or dismissed now made sense in context, revealing coded messages and indirect communications confirming the wider conspiracy. The shock was sharp, cutting deeper than the initial betrayal. A simmering anger settled into a quiet determination. I could feel the gears of strategy clicking into place, my mind mapping potential responses, considering leverage points and timing with an almost surgical precision. I began my first subtle counteractions without alerting anyone to my awareness. A carefully phrased question here, a hint dropped there, each designed to gauge reactions and test boundaries without confrontation. I observed body language and facial microexpressions as if they were lines of code, deciphering what each gesture implied about loyalty or deceit. Internal reflection guided my every move, memories of past family events teaching me which battles to fight and which to let simmer. There was a controlled empowerment in acting subtly, in feeling my presence recognized even if unnoticed overtly, as though I were planting seeds whose roots would grow unnoticed until the right moment. The reactions I observed in turn shaped my evolving strategy. Nervous fidgeting, a quick glance exchanged between conspirators, subtle overconfidence. Every signal was a data point. I made mental notes on potential interventions, rehearsed phrasing for conversations that might occur at the wedding, and anticipated the unfolding of the family drama down to small details. Each adjustment strengthened my composure, giving me a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the tension around me. I realized that the web of alliances, hidden and otherwise, could be anticipated and navigated to my advantage if approached carefully. Throughout the evening, I anchored myself to the familiar symbols of prior experiences, a folded napkin from a previous gathering, a photograph showing moments of overlooked contribution. These anchors reminded me of my resilience, of the subtle power in observation and memory, and of the lessons I had learned from years of being underestimated. They served as touchstones for self-worth, reinforcing the strategic clarity I was cultivating. Every calculated smile, every polite nod was part of a larger plan, a quiet assertion that I was no longer merely a passive participant in the family's designs. By the time I left the estate, night had fully descended, the streets quiet and reflective under the dim glow of streetlights. I walked to my car, deliberate in my steps, the cool air carrying the faint scent of magnolias and freshly mown grass, grounding me even as my mind raced through the evening's discoveries. I was no longer just observing, I was preparing to act. The alliances I had uncovered, the subtle power plays, and the calculated deceptions were now mapped in my mind. The tension had risen to a palpable edge, yet a quiet control had settled within me. I understood that patience and precision would be my allies in the coming storm, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of readiness pressing forward with every thought, every plan, every measured breath. The library was quiet, yet it felt like a battlefield waiting to unfold. I stepped in, carefully placing my bag on a chair, and took a moment to observe the room. Every family member's stance, every subtle glance, and the way they shifted in their seats spoke volumes. I reviewed the evidence I had gathered over the past days, screenshots, cryptic messages, fleeting comments, and felt a surge of cautious determination. This was my chance to confront the subtle slights, to assert myself without creating a spectacle. The tension in the room was palpable, but I held myself poised, reminding myself that observation and strategy were my allies tonight. A dismissive remark about a previous family project drew my attention. The tone was casual, almost polite, but the underlying intention to diminish me was clear. I responded calmly, choosing words with care, threading precision into every syllable. "Actually, I handled that with a lot of consideration," I said, letting the subtle pride in my voice mark the boundary without igniting open conflict. Eyes darted around, some surprised, others wary, and I felt the first flicker of empowerment. I could see loyalty and bias revealing themselves in micro-reactions. Every subtle twitch, a clue, every averted glance, a confirmation. My heart raced, but I kept my exterior smooth, a mirror reflecting calm determination. As the conversation moved, I began to maneuver strategically. I redirected topics, inserting indirect references to past events that reminded them of their overconfidence, a casual mention of a forgotten promise, a lightly phrased question about someone's recollection of a shared family moment. Each was calculated to plant doubt, to create a subtle shift in perception. I watched reactions closely. A flicker of unease, a momentary hesitation, the smallest tightening of a jaw. The thrill of controlled influence coursed through me, and I savored it quietly. It was exhilarating to feel agency in a situation where I had once been overlooked. I continued to observe, adjusting my approach as patterns emerged. C4's body language betrayed a struggle to maintain composure, while C3's tone wavered slightly, betraying overconfidence. I noted potential allies, those who seemed attentive but neutral, and cataloged them for later intervention. My mind was running scenarios at a rapid pace, rehearsing responses, measuring the impact of each word and glance. The library was no longer just a room, it was a stage, and I was quietly orchestrating the scene from within, calculating every move to ensure maximum advantage at the wedding. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection, my gaze resting on the folded napkin I had brought along from an earlier gathering. It was a simple token, but it reminded me of my journey, the unnoticed contributions, the quiet perseverance, the growing strength to face the family with resolve. I drew a steadying breath, letting the symbol anchor my confidence. I had learned to navigate these dynamics, to transform frustration into strategy, and to maintain composure under pressure. The mental clarity this reflection afforded me was essential, reinforcing that I was ready to act decisively when the moment arrived. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, I carried a newfound awareness of who supported me and who did not. My strategies were taking shape, each observation sharpening the plan for the confrontation ahead. I knew the upcoming wedding would test patience and cunning alike, but I was prepared. Each family interaction had been a puzzle piece, revealing the full picture, and now the framework for action was clear. The night felt charged, a silent promise of what was to come, and I embraced the controlled anticipation, ready to execute the moves I had so carefully prepared. The hallway was dimly lit, the muted glow from sconces casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the tension in my mind. I paused by the doorway, reviewing the events of the library confrontation, replaying every subtle shift in expression, every reaction to my carefully measured words. The night had already revealed cracks in their composure, but I needed more: confirmation, leverage, and a plan to turn hesitation into advantage. I noted the way C3 lingered a little too long near the study shelves, pretending to examine books, while C5's subtle glances suggested he was taking stock of the room as well. Every nuance mattered. The slightest twitch could reveal intent. I mentally cataloged them, aligning observations with potential strategies, my pulse quickening under the weight of anticipation. Each step I took down the hall was measured, deliberate, as though the floor itself demanded respect for the careful moves I had in mind. I paused outside the sitting room, hearing murmured conversation that trailed off when I entered. My approach was assertive but controlled, delivering indirect remarks that carried weight without exposing my full hand. A comment about the family's recent decisions slipped naturally from my lips, an observation masquerading as casual conversation, and I watched reactions with sharp interest. C3's eyebrow flickered, a subtle tightening at the corners of the mouth, while C4's hand shifted slightly, betraying internal tension. Even minor participants in the room couldn't hide their unease. I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. The careful placement of words and knowledge of prior incidents had created ripples, shifting the undercurrent of power in my favor. I let my gaze linger, making eye contact just long enough to communicate composure, confidence, and an unspoken warning. Seizing the moment, I leveraged evidence collected over the past days. Small reminders of past events were slipped naturally into dialogue, never accusatory, always observational. A reference to a forgotten promise, a subtle mention of prior missteps, anything that could seed doubt or prompt reflection in the antagonist's minds. C5 responded with a cautious smile, the beginnings of an alliance forming quietly beneath the surface. I weighed each reaction carefully, mapping support and opposition with a mental clarity that only comes from long experience in reading human behavior. Every gesture, every glance, every pause contributed to a growing sense of empowerment that I had never allowed myself before. For the first time, my past invisibility felt like a distant memory, replaced by deliberate action and measured influence. I continued to test boundaries, observing how far C3 and the minor antagonists would overreach before self-control surfaced. Each minor misstep, a tiny gift of information about intentions and character. I practiced restraint, aware that impulsive action could unravel everything I had painstakingly orchestrated. Instead, I allowed subtle provocations to simmer, noting nervous tics, slight hesitations, and micro-reactions that told me more than overt confrontation ever could. In these moments, patience became my weapon, calculation my shield, and foresight my compass. I was no longer merely reacting. I was shaping the environment, guiding the conversation and tension toward outcomes favorable to me, all while maintaining an appearance of calm, almost casual observation. Later, I allowed a pause to anchor myself emotionally, resting my hand on the folded napkin from prior gatherings. Its familiar texture reminded me of how far I had come, how every slight, every exclusion had honed my awareness and strategic mind. I felt a quiet empowerment, a mental fortitude solidifying. The family's web of alliances and deceptions had been slowly unraveling before my eyes, and now I was poised, ready to respond decisively when the wedding arrived. Each calculated move had strengthened my resolve, every observation had increased my confidence, and every measured word had tested the limits of my adversaries. I could feel the approaching storm, and for the first time, I was ready to meet it on my own terms. By the time I left the sitting room, the night had deepened, and the estate was silent except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. I walked with careful steps, my mind already rehearsing strategies for the following day, aware of potential risks and the allies I could quietly rely upon. The tension was palpable, but it was mine to command. I had escalated the confrontation in controlled bursts, and the family was beginning to recognize a presence they had long underestimated. Tomorrow, I knew, everything could change, but only if I timed my moves with precision, maintaining composure while executing the plan that had been growing steadily in my mind. The quiet empowerment I carried into the night would be my armor, and patience, my ultimate tool. I arrived early at the venue. The sun was dipping but not gone yet, throwing long shadows across the courtyard. I walked past the empty aisles, brushing petals off the chairs with my fingers. Volunteers hovered nearby, offering assistance. I nodded curtly, already wrapped tight in my purpose. In every floral arrangement, in every seat chart, I saw pieces of the plan designed against me. I replayed alliances shifting, deals struck behind closed doors. They expected someone fragile. They'd meet steel. I whispered to myself, they expect me to break. I'll stand unbroken. The hall doors opened. Guests stepped in. The game was about to begin. The speeches started with polite applause, hushed smiles. Marla rose and spoke of family, loyalty, the importance of love. But then she leaned in, voice soft yet audible. Some people don't know when to stop asking for the spotlight. A murmur rolled through the room. Some faces turned to me. Some returned to wine glasses. I felt the jab as if she'd struck me across the chest. The words weren't hidden, they were a public blade. She had almost exposed what she always whispered behind closed doors. Now she gave it voice. Moments before we were to start, he leaned toward me. The groom, a man I trusted, flattened his lips into a smile and in front of our families whispered loud enough for ears around us, "You'll feel more like a guest than a bride tonight." The effect was electric. Gasps, glances, shifting chairs. My heart pounded hard, but my face stayed steady. He may have been pressured, but that excuse didn't erase the insult. I slipped away to the bridesmaid's room under pretense of adjusting my dress. Behind the mirror's reflection, I pulled out my phone. I tapped a message to the DJ. "Hold music, play mine at Q." I loaded the recordings. Marla's toast, his whisper. I positioned them in the sequence, just before cake cutting. I rehearsed my speech silently. Short, crisp, turning venom into clarity. I would not shout, but they'd hear. After vows and light applause, someone handed me a microphone. The hall expected soft music. Instead, my recorded truth filled the room, the toast, the insult, echoing off walls and across faces. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. A few guests rose, others stared with horror. Then I spoke, a calm voice in a storm of reactions. I thanked family, but twisted each compliment into honesty. I turned each concession into a demand for recognition. I came here to marry, not to hide. Let truth be our legacy tonight. And I stepped back, leaving no room for denial. The hall erupted, not in cheers, but in acknowledgement. Faces shifted, eyes softened. They could no longer pretend I wasn't there. I had taken back the silence they had tried to gift me. I woke up to quiet. No buzzing phone, no anxious calls, no preparations to manage, just sunlight creeping past the curtains and touching my skin like it hadn't seen me in weeks. I sat up slowly. My dress still hung in the corner, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. I walked barefoot into the reception hall. The chairs had been stacked, petals swept, tables stripped of their centerpieces. Only faint echoes of music and murmurs from the night before lingered in the air. Outside, a few cars pulled out of the lot. I leaned on a pillar and watched them leave, one by one. We fought for one night, I whispered to myself, but what comes next matters more. I returned to my room and opened my journal. Flipping back to the pages I'd written weeks ago, I found words heavy with sadness, but also defiance, notes of betrayal and hope. It hit me then. The woman who wrote those pages was already becoming someone else. The woman who stood before a crowd last night. She wasn't writing anymore. She was rewriting. Mid-morning, a knock broke the stillness. I opened the door to find Aunt Elowen holding a sealed envelope. She didn't say a word, just pressed it into my hand. Her eyes looked older than yesterday. Inside was my mother's handwriting, flowing, rushed, emotional. The letter, hidden for who knows how long, held more than apologies. It was full of fear. She wrote about shame, about reputation, about failing to protect me the right way. I wanted to keep you safe, one line read, but I only taught you to be small. My voice cracked reading those words aloud. But I didn't crumble. I let the weight of it sit, then settle. Love isn't punishing, but fear makes people cruel. That truth is uglier when it wears pearls and calls itself protection. Later that day, a message popped up on my phone. No name, just, I kept copies, they underestimated who would see. Attached were documents, backup files, drafts, screenshots. Evidence that Marla had never erased. From a former staff member, likely long gone from the estate but still watching. I stared at the screen, not in shock, but in relief. Everything I needed was now undeniable. No more gaslighting. No more, you misunderstood. I didn't just survive it. I documented it. In the early evening, as I wandered the garden barefoot, my little cousin came running toward me. Her dress was too big and grass-stained, her curls bouncing. She looked up at me, curious. Aunt Faye, why did everyone whisper about you? I knelt, brushed her hair from her cheek, and said the only thing I knew to be fully true. Because I was brave enough for all of us. Her eyes held mine for a beat too long, as if something inside her recognized it. That moment, of silence, of honesty, held more power than any speech I gave the night before. Later, I gathered Kale, Dana, and Dorian in the garden. No ceremony, no glasses raised, just real people and honest air. I thanked them, not for rescuing me, but for standing still when the rest were falling apart. I told them I wasn't interested in revenge. That's not where I wanted to live. I wanted to rebuild. I read them a quote I've carried for years, but never believed until now. Your crown has been bought and paid for. Put it on your head and wear it. I handed the legal documents over to my lawyer that night. Not to fight, but to let the system untangle itself. I was done babysitting other people's guilt. Now I look ahead, to work that heals, not hurts. I want to write, to speak, to rebuild my name with hands that aren't clenched in fists. As the morning light shifted across my skin, I felt the weight lift. and the future begin anew.